Klusendorf's rebuttal. We'll hear all of that, and then I want us to hear the section on the Q&A between the two of them, and then we're going to finish with kind of talking about what's current in the pro-life movement. We might even look at a few of those questions in the booklet to finish our time out. Today is the last class, and all of you pass. So your graduation gift is one of those books. So I hope you'll grab one of those. I found them to be very, very helpful. So feel free to get up during any time and grab you one of those books, okay? All right, we're going to go ahead. I'm going to pray, and then we'll start the video. Father, thank you for our church. Thank you for the freedom, privilege to worship together, to learn, to talk about these things, and to hopefully be better equipped to give an answer and to help facilitate the changing of minds. And so I pray that you would further that in us today in this class and use these resources as a way to further equip us and give us more opportunities to speak truth. We pray that we would do it with love and compassion, and we would do it winsomely. And we pray these things in Christ's name. Amen. All right, here we go.
At this time, Scott will have 10 minutes to give his rebuttal. Let me encourage you to begin to jot down your questions if you have not already done so. We'll have Q&A shortly.
Let's review the syllogism. The syllogism I put forward tonight was that it's wrong to intentionally kill an innocent human being, that abortion does that, therefore it's wrong. I defended that with the science of embryology, arguing that the unborn are distinct, living, and whole human beings, and I cited embryology textbooks to make that claim, and I argued philosophically there was no essential difference between you, the embryo, and you, the adult, that would justify killing you back then. Nadine responded primarily with agnosticism, but this fails, and let me explain why. She begins her remarks with an appeal to the majority. No justice recognizes the unborn as human beings with rights. Well, justices once didn't recognize slaves with rights either. In fact, in the Supreme Court case Plessy versus Ferguson, the Supreme Court appealed to the status of where the legal law was. It said, look, we have precedent, we don't want to change it. This is settled law, and yet it was deeply immoral law. An appeal to the majority will not make her case. Now, here's the biggest problem, though. If we don't know if the unborn are human, should we be killing them? If you're driving home from tonight's debate and you see what looks like an old coat in the road, but it could be an old man who had a little bit too much to drink, are you going to run the coat over? No, you're going to err on the side of caution. Or to borrow an example from former President Ronald Wilson Reagan, if you're out hunting and you see bushes rustling in front of you and you don't know if it's that deer you've been after or your best buddy, are you going to open fire? Not unless you're Dick Cheney, right? You're going to err on the side of caution. There's no way you're going to open fire. If we don't know if the unborn are human, we shouldn't be killing them. Nadine also argued there's no consensus on when life begins. Men and women, this is utterly fallacious. How does it follow that because people disagree, there's no right answer? By the way, if disagreement means no truth, Nadine's position is falsified because I disagree with it, and so do a whole lot of other people. The reality is people once disagreed on whether slaves ought to have rights. It didn't mean there wasn't a right answer. They once disagreed on whether women should have the right to vote. It didn't mean there wasn't a right answer. Hadley Arkes puts it well. The absence of consensus does not mean an absence of truth. Nadine also cited a Webster brief from 1989 from the Webster Supreme Court case of 167 experts who were allegedly testifying that we don't know when life begins. Now, what's interesting, what she didn't tell you, I've actually researched this brief, there wasn't a single embryologist in that brief. There were 11 Nobel laureates, but none of them are embryologists. In fact, I'd like to quote for you the rest of that statement from the brief. I think you'll find it shocking. Listen to what they say. There is no scientific consensus that human life begins at conception, at a given stage of fetal development, or at birth. These so-called experts say we can't even know if a born child is a human being. So that argument she cited not only disqualifies the unborn if it were valid, it would disqualify the newborn. She also cited Scott Gilbert's book, Bioethics in a New Embryology. I'm familiar with this book. It's a nice book, but it's not an embryology textbook. In fact, Scott Gilbert wrote it with 2 of his students. It's a layman's book, and it's about bioethics. Bioethics is philosophy, not science of embryology. She cited a source that cannot live up to what she hopes it will. In fact, the book, as you read through it, and it's a nice read, I disagree with it, but it's a nice read. As you begin to read it, he quickly shifts from the question, what is the unborn, to how should we value persons? In other words, he ditches science almost immediately and punts to philosophy. Nadine also cited that, she also said that we can't know if the unborn are human because there's so much disagreement. I got news for you. There's plenty of people on her side of the issue who will dispute what she just said. Ronald Dworkin called abortion the deliberate killing of a human embryo. David Boonin, author of A Defense of Abortion, writes, a human fetus, after all, is simply a human being at a very early stage in his or her development. I mean, these are not people on my side of the issue. These are people on her side. Peter Singer, the Princeton bioethicist, writes, whether a human being is a member of a given species is something that can be determined scientifically. And I appreciate this about him. Singer looks at this and says, look, I'm not a scientist, but I can read the data. I can see the evidence. We can know what the unborn is, says Peter Singer. It's not as crazy and hard to know as you might think. In fact, a journal article that appeared in California Medicine in 1970 as abortion was breaking onto our scene made a very interesting point. This journal article supports abortion, but listen to what the authors say in California Medicine in September of 1970. Since the old ethic has not yet been fully displaced, it has been necessary to separate the idea of abortion from the idea of killing, which continues to be socially abhorrent. The result has been a curious avoidance of the scientific fact, which everyone really knows, that human life begins at conception and is continuous, whether intrauterine or extrauterine, until death. The very considerable semantic gymnastics which are required to rationalize abortion as anything but the taking of a human life would be ludicrous if they were not often put forth under socially impeccable auspices. It is suggested that this schizophrenic sort of subterfuge is necessary because while the old ethic is being accepted, the old one has not yet gone away and been rejected. Here's the other problem with Nadine's argument. If we don't know if the unborn are human, Roe itself falls apart. Roe v. Wade, according to Justice Blackmun, is predicated on the status of the fetus. Blackmun said the right to an abortion hinges on the status of the fetus. That is, whether or not it's a human being. The court then said it didn't know if the unborn were human, which means it also doesn't know if a right to an abortion exists. In other words, Nadine's agnosticism gets undermined legally, not just morally. And this is deeply problematic to review. She also had some medical inaccuracies. She called the early embryo a fertilized egg. This is name-calling, not medical science. Anybody who studies embryology knows that sperm and egg die in the act of conception. They surrender their constituents into the makeup of a new being. Fertilized egg is a misnomer. You're not going to find it in credible embryology textbooks. She also said that miscarriage defeats my view. Really? How does it follow that because nature spontaneously triggers a miscarriage, that A, the embryos in question are not fully human, or B, we may intentionally kill them? Many countries, like India, have horrendous high infant mortality rates. Children die before a month old after being born. Does it follow those who die sooner are less human and valuable than those who die later? Earthquakes happen in third world countries and kill hundreds of thousands. Does that justify mass murder? There's nothing in this claim that does anything to refute the case that I made. Later this evening, in my closing, I'm going to talk about a couple of other things that Nadine did that were mistaken, some assumptions she made. She repeatedly assumed the unborn were not human. She said things like this: no law should bar a woman from making decisions. Really? Well, that depends on what we're choosing. Choose what? What if a mother wants to kill her 2-year-old in the privacy of the home? Should she be allowed to do that? The argument only works if she assumes the unborn are not human, something she did not argue for. Another thing that happened is that Nadine provided us with an insecure foundation for human rights. She cited the mystery passage. At the heart of liberty, she quoted from the Supreme Court's Casey decision, is the right to define one's own concept of existence, of meaning, of the universe, and of the mystery of human life. In other words, human nature is not objective, it's subjective. So why can't a future Supreme Court just come along and make women up not to be creatures of rights if that happens to fit its definition of the mystery of human life? And voila, women no longer have any rights. I think my foundation for human rights is much better. We all have value. We all have dignity, not because of function, not because 9 justices somewhere either define us into existence or out of existence. Keep that in mind. The same justices who define you into existence can define you out. Rather, I rest my case on the Declaration of Independence. All men are created equal. We are endowed with certain rights, and no government can take them away. And we have those rights from the moment we began to exist.
At this time, we're going to ask for the podium to be removed so we can have a dialogue between Nadine and Scott for about 15 minutes. You know, in many ways, we could have reframed tonight. Instead of calling it a debate, we could have simply called it a discussion. That's what we're here to do. We're here to discuss tonight various views respectfully with one another. And so we're going to do that now. While they're discussing with one another, probing deeper into each other's perspectives, I'm encouraging you to please make note of your questions, because following this 15-minute discussion and dialogue, we will have Q&A. And again, there will be a mic set up on either side of the stage for one another. I'll allow Professor Strawson first to ask any questions she would of Scott.
Maybe I'll sit down here so I can see Scott. We were joking that this is such a long table to
We
keep us
could,
so
you
far
want to put
apart.
her,
but-
switch with her?
Yeah, we can switch.
We'll switch.
Okay, yeah, that would be good. And is this mic working now, by the way? I turned it on, great, thanks.
Nadine and I have a developed sense of civility, so we can be close to each other and everything will be fine.
So, Scott, my first question for you is, would you absolutely oppose abortion in every circumstance, including when it's necessary to save a woman's life, when it's necessary for her health,
Yeah.
when she is the victim of rape or incest being the most common examples where
Sure.
many pro-lifers make exceptions?
Yeah, fair question. Let me take the first one, her life. There are medical cases known as ectopic pregnancy where the embryo implants on the inner wall of the fallopian tube. If you do not remove that embryo, as that embryo grows in that narrow tube, the danger to the mother is clear. That embryo grows, the tube bursts, the mother hemorrhages to death. You're a pro-life doctor. What are you going to do? Do you do nothing and let 2 humans die? Or do you act in such a way that you save one life even though the unintended but foreseen result is the death of the human embryo? And my answer, Nadine, is we act to save the mother. Now, here's where I need to get back to definitions. You'll notice in my syllogism, I defined abortion very carefully. The intentional killing of an innocent human being. When a doctor acts to save a mother's life, he is not intentionally killing an innocent human being. He can foresee the death of the embryo in the case of ectopic pregnancy, but he does not intend it. So I don't even call that abortion. That's a life-saving surgery that any physician who's pro-life would do, and no legislation has ever forbid that kind of surgery. You also mentioned rape, and that's the question.
And also, I mean, I'd like to hear your answer to
Sure.
that, but also, if it's not a matter of literally saving the pregnant woman's life,
Yeah,
but
health.
her health.
Sure,
to avoid
good
a
question.
serious adverse health impact, including perhaps potential infertility.
Yeah, good question. Dr. Thomas Murphy Goodwin, who runs the largest prenatal health clinic in the world at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center at USC in Los Angeles, he sees 15,000 women a year who are told by their primary care physicians, if you do not abort, you will die or have incredibly serious complications to your health. He says of those 15 to 16,000 women a year, only 1 to 2 cases a year actually require ending the pregnancy to save the mother's health in the sense of grave health threat or life. Now, here's where it gets interesting. He treats women with advanced stages of breast cancer with heavy doses of chemotherapy when their primary care physician said, if you don't abort, you're going to die. And he says this, the mother and the fetus tolerate the treatment because he knows how to do it. And he said the problem is too many primary care physicians recommend termination because they don't want to get sued for wrongful birth, and they thus recommend it. Now, you did use a word I do need to define, and then I'll stop so you can follow up. I don't want to hog all your time here. But you mentioned the word health, and I think we need to be clear on what this means. The Supreme Court in Roe v. Wade said that abortions could only be restricted in the 3rd trimester by the state if it did not interfere with the woman's, quote, health, unquote. In Doe v. Bolton, the companion case, the Supreme Court went on to define health so broadly you can drive a Mack truck through it. Familiar health, social health, emotional health, and health. In fact, the World Health Organization's definition of health, which is that broad, encompassing loophole, is precisely what the court relied on in defining health. So what we end up with is not a balanced Roe v. Wade Supreme Court decision. We've got a very radical one. In fact, so radical that in 1983, a U.S. Senate subcommittee said that based on Roe's definition of health, there are no meaningful restrictions to abortion through all 9 months of pregnancy.
Well, I disagree with that, and besides, the Supreme Court modified significantly that standard in the current governing law, which is Casey, which,
well, it said undue burden, but the undue burden, Nadine.
No, Scott, let me finish my sentence, please. Which allows abortion to be completely outlawed. And to the best of my knowledge, most states take advantage of that option at the point of viability. It got rid of the trimester approach altogether. But going back to the question, what do you define as health? Would there ever be a situation short of literally necessary to save a woman's life?
Yeah, I just gave you one ectopic pregnancy. Absolutely, I would do it there.
I said,
and if they're
right. When it's not literally life-saving.
Sure. Yeah, and let me answer.
Would there be a definition of health?
Sure, I'll answer that. Let me make an observation, though. Even if my answer were inconsistent, it wouldn't eradicate the syllogism I put forward, that the unborn are distinct, living, whole human beings, and that killing them is unjust. So even if I answered this question in a way that seemed inconsistent with my view, it would only show I'm inconsistent. It wouldn't rule out the evidence I presented. But let me answer it. If the mother's health were in danger, no, because health has been defined so broadly.
No, but is there any health situation that, according to
I am
your
unaware
view,
of any health situation, as Dr. Thomas Murphy Goodwin put out, that requires killing the child to save the mother. There are cases where they do need to end the pregnancy early, and they will do that.
You're, as we law professors would say, you're fighting the factual situation. Let's assume hypothetically that there's, let's say she will not lose her life, but she will be rendered infertile. Let's use that as an example of an adverse health consequence.
Right.
Would that be a situation where you would say the pregnancy could be terminated?
In that case, the mother stands to lose one good. The child stands to lose an ultimate good. The mother loses fertility. The child loses its life. Being killed is immeasurably worse than losing your fertility.
Okay. And rape and incest?
Yeah, thank you. Here's the question. You and I both agree that a woman who has been sexually assaulted has suffered a terrible injustice. We both agree on that. My guess is we disagree on the solution. So here's the question that comes to mind. How should a civil society treat innocent human beings who remind us of a painful event? Is it okay to kill them so we can feel better? we're back to the question, what is the unborn? Does hardship justify homicide? If I have a 2-year-old in front of me and his father was a rapist, would it be okay to execute the 2-year-old for the sin of his father? I think we'd all say no. Which means if the unborn are human, like that toddler, we shouldn't kill them in the name of hardship any more than we would kill the toddler for that reason. Now, having said that, I want to make it clear that my answer may not feel good to me because I can easily sympathize with that woman that I can see right in front of me. It's easy. I can see her. I can sympathize with her. It's harder for me to sympathize with her child, but I can't trample on the rights of that child without also putting in jeopardy the very foundation that gives any of us value and a right to life, namely that we shouldn't be killed just because someone would feel better if we were dead.
Yeah, so I understand. I mean, you are being consistent in your view that from the earliest moment of conception, and I'm sorry, what is the scientific term you want to use for that?
Distinct, living, whole human being.
Zygote?
Yeah.
I mean, okay, that's what I was, in layman's terms, calling the fertilized egg,
Yeah.
right? And that happens.
Yeah, that was a misnomer.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, the zygote, you are treating as a
Yes.
full-fledged person
Yes.
from that moment on.
Yes.
Now, except you're treating it as more than a full-fledged person.
No, I'm not, Nadine.
Unless, no, let me tell you why, Scott, or ask you why. Is there any other situation where you would say that one person has to donate her body, her physical organs, her health
Yeah.
to sustain another person? For
Yeah.
example, in our legal system now, a parent cannot be forced
Right.
even to make an organ
Right.
donation, even if it's necessary to save a living, fully born human child.
Right.
Do you disagree with that?
Nadine-
Would you want to change that
Nadine,
too?
if you as a parent want to withhold using your resources, your body, to save your own child's life, you're right. The law will protect you doing that. However, you do not have a right to slit your child's throat in the name of withholding support. Abortion is much more than merely withholding support. It's intentionally killing an innocent human being through dismemberment, poisoning, burning. My friend Frank Beckwith puts it real well. He says calling abortion merely the withholding of support is kind of like suffocating someone with a pillow and calling it the withdrawing of oxygen. I mean, there's a whole lot more going on here than merely withholding support.
So you're describing
If
it.
I could just jump in for just a moment, I want to give Scott an opportunity
Oh,
to
sorry.
ask the question
Okay.
of Nadine as well.
I don't mind being grilled. I mean, it's...
He's getting to say a lot. Yeah, I'll just ask one more question, and that is, Scott, since you're describing it as such a brutal murder, shouldn't the woman be subject to criminal prosecution according to your values?
There's nothing wrong with a law that says there should be consequences for intentionally killing an innocent human being, but as to what those consequences will depend on whether there's been a meeting of the minds. And in order to prove co-conspiracy, you're going to have to show that the mother's understanding of the Abortion Act matched that of the doctor. And that clearly is not the case in most cases. In fact, I have with me up here today, somewhere, that's in my bag, I'll find it later, Abortion Practice by Warren Hearn, where he describes the process of turning the ultrasound machine away from the woman during the abortion procedure so she doesn't see what's happening. He talks about hooking up a Doppler for fetal heartbeat to make sure that the fetus is killed in abortion, but don't let the mother hear this. That is definitely a difference in knowledge in many, many cases. And that is why the courts have traditionally worked with women and not prosecuted them, because it needs the woman to be a witness against the doctor. But even if I were inconsistent, Nadine, tonight's debate is about whether this is morally right to have an abortion. Even if I were inconsistent, it doesn't prove my arguments are wrong.
I'm not trying to say that you're inconsistent. I'm trying
Yeah.
to, in fact, I think you're actually spelling out the logical consequences of your position, which is what I wanted to hear. Would
Yeah.
you say that
Well, what's
a
wrong with a law
doctor-
that says
would
you
say
can't
that a
intentionally kill innocent human
Would you
beings?
say that a doctor should be subject to criminal prosecution for performing abortions?
Sure, if the evidence is there, he should be convicted. Absolutely.
I mean, well, you're saying the evidence means intentionally destroying a zygote.
Well, first of all, let's be clear. Abortions don't happen at the zygotic stage. They happen at 6 weeks post-conception, because if you do them earlier than that, it's surgically risky for the mother. So we're not talking about zygotes here. We're talking about early fetuses that are destroyed through abortion.
Well, how about emergency contraception that works at a very early stage? Is that something you're morally opposed to? And
I'm not
should be-
opposed to any birth control that does not take the life of a developing human being once it's begun, and the debate over emergency contraception, the jury is still out on it. I think there's at least plausible evidence it could be abortifacient. Now, this is where some of my pro-life friends in the audience, I'm going to earn their rage right now. I may need you to defend me, but here's what I'm going to say. The evidence that the morning after pill, Plan B, is abortifacient, when you look beyond the labeling to the actual peer-reviewed evidence, is inconclusive. In other words, we don't know for sure if it's abortifacient. It may have a secondary mechanism that in the event of breakthrough ovulation provokes early miscarriage, but we don't know it for sure. So I am willing to say we should err on the side of caution, but I'm not willing to go beyond the evidence and say I know for sure it's an abortion pill.
Okay.
Do I get a few questions
yeah,
here, or do?
absolutely.
Well, you get at least one. I tried to help you earlier.
Just
but,
one?
you
Okay.
Get about one.
You got to talk a lot. Arguably, that's more valuable.
Well, we want to hear from you too, Nadine.
Thank you.
All right. Nadine, I just want to ask a question that will be seen as a little more on the heart level than just the legal, though it has legal implications. Justice Anthony Kennedy, who you cited in the mystery passage a short time ago, had this to say in his dissent of the Stenberg case. This was the first Supreme Court case dealing with partial birth abortion, the process
No,
where...
it was the second one. Oh, you're talking
No,
about
Stenberg was the
Carhart?
first.
Oh, right.
Carhart was the second. All right. In Stenberg, though, a discussion came up about dismemberment abortions, the kind that Dr. Warren Hearn teaches in his textbook. And I want to read you what Anthony Kennedy said about the D&E dismemberment abortions. Okay, here's what he said. The fetus in many cases, now keep in mind, Anthony Kennedy is not known as a pro-life stalwart. The fetus, in many cases, dies just as a human adult or child would. It bleeds to death as it is torn limb from limb. The fetus can be alive at the beginning of the dismemberment process and can survive for a time while its limbs are being torn off. Dr. Leroy Carhart, the abortionist who challenged Nebraska's partial birth ban, has observed fetal heartbeat with extensive parts of the fetus removed and testified that mere dismemberment of a limb does not always cause death because he knows of a physician who removed the arm of a fetus only to have the fetus go on to be born as a living child with one arm. At the conclusion of a D&E abortion, the abortionist is left with a tray full of pieces. I have two questions. First of all, that girl who was born with only one arm because her arm was torn off in the abortion procedure, was she wronged?
First of all, I know nothing. I have no idea whether this is factually true.
I'm quoting
But,
Anthony Kennedy's dissent.
There was a lot in that dissent that I disagree with, and I haven't independently researched it. But I won't fight what I will treat as a hypothetical. If you're talking about...
Well, it's not hypothetical. I'm quoting an actual
If you're talking about
case.
something that is viable, they have a right to be fully delivered. That is exactly what the Supreme Court
Okay, but you're
held
missing
in
the question
Casey
here.
in 1992.
Was that girl wronged? Her arm was torn off in the womb.
Apparently,
So you would-
it sounds like it was beyond
Okay, let's
the
say she
point
wa-
of viability.
Oh, well, her arm was torn off, okay?
But according to your standards, Scott, it would still not be wrong unless we talk about the part of the analysis that is always missing from your perspective, and that is what about the pregnant woman? What if this was necessary to save her life?
Okay, in this particular case, we're not talking about it. And by the way, partial birth abortions are not documented to be necessary to save the mother's life. In this case, what we are dealing with is a child in the womb with her arm torn off. She now
Well,
doesn't have an arm.
Every single medical organization, including the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, the Public Health Association, every single one of them filed briefs in
Yeah.
support of the medical life-saving necessity of this procedure in certain tragic pregnancies. They occur extremely rarely. These are all wanted pregnancies, and some tragic complication develops late in the process, as a result of which women make a very
Yeah, I've
painful
actually got the
decision.
Journal of the American Medical Association brief here on partial birth abortion, and the doctors make it very clear that this procedure is not needed to save the mother's life. And why would it be? It's a 3-day procedure. The woman goes in, has laminaria inserted, you got to wait a day, then they've got to dilate the cervix slowly, then deliver the child breech first, and with only the head left in the birth canal, stab it in the back of the skull and vacuum its brains out. If this were an emergency life-saving procedure, they'd do a quick D&E. They wouldn't use a procedure that takes 3 days, Nadine.
Scott, I don't know where you are getting that so-called
Journal of the
evidence,
American Medical
but let me tell you,
Association.
every single medical organization, all of you, you've got your phones, you look it up. Don't take my word for it.
What they said was they came out in favor of the procedure remaining legal. They did not present
Because
evidence
they
it was
said
medically
that
necessary.
Because there are certain cases in which it is medically necessary, and that option should therefore cannot morally and ethically be removed from doctors and women in those tragic situations when it is necessary.
Well, it simply says here that the panel could not
Kennedy,
come up
by
with
the way,
that.
He also had what is absolutely, indisputably bad science when he said in that same opinion that women are depressed and regret having had abortion.
I haven't argued that
He was
tonight.
going to do us a favor by
Well,
saying, I'm going to protect you poor little women.
Justice
who think you
Kennedy
need it,
quoted an
and then you live
abortionist.
to regret it.
Well, first of all,
and the scientific and medical evidence is absolutely
So-
clear that that is a myth, that
Okay.
most women who have abortions are relieved.
I'm not even
if they're
disputing
sick.
that tonight. I'm not even going
I'm
there
just
because the
saying
morality
his
of abortion doesn't hinge on how women feel about
His representation
it.
of the medical evidence is not credible.
Well, he was
Okay,
quoting an
I'm going
abortionist.
to jump in.
All right,
I'm gonna
do I
jump
get one
in
more
right
question?
there. You can say, well,
Okay.
we don't have time for one more
Well, I only got
question.
one. Do I get one more? Can we add a little on here?
Unfortunately, we can't because
Okay.
we extended time. But what we do want to do is give opportunity for this audience, this wonderful audience, to be able to to present their questions. Again, let's give Nadine and Scott a big hand, if we could, for remaining both passionate and respectful with one another, and we ask that your questions would be just that. I'm going to switch seats with Nadine, and I'm going to ask you to begin to line up at either microphone. Now, again, if you're lining up on my left, your right, that means you have a question for Nadine. If you're lining up on my right, your left, that means you have a question for Scott. And so this is going to be a little bit challenging because we want to go back and forth with questions. So please think of ways to reframe your question directed towards Scott. And that way we can be a little bit
Which line
fair.
is mine?
That's right. You get this line. You get the shorter line. And it's not a likability contest. With that being said, let me just again give this brief caution. We're asking that you would be succinct in asking your question. This is not a time for you to give a monologue, nor is this time for you to add yourself as the third person to this debate. This is an opportunity for you to ask a brief question. Each debater here will have 2 minutes to respond to your question. They will have 2 minutes to respond to. You have 2 minutes for the question, the person you're asking a question to, and then the other individual will have 1 minute to give a rebuttal question. We will start first here with a question for Professor Strawson. Thank you. You can state your first name.
My name is Sharon, and I'm curious why you did not watch the video that Scott played about abortion.
I've watched it many times. I assume it was the same one I've seen before.
That's a fair response from Nadine. Number one, even if she chose never to watch it, I wouldn't hold that against her. She's not required to watch it. We make video viewing totally optional. And I will vouch for my friend that she is, in the 10 or 12 debates we've done, she has had ample opportunity to see the film. So I wouldn't say that that counts against her position.
And I don't know exactly what Sharon was getting at, but let me say this. The ACLU has consistently defended the right of pro-life advocates to show images like this, and which, as you may or may not know, that right is contested all over the country. People saying, you know, it's shocking, it's horrifying, it's inaccurate, it's various criticisms, and we've always come to the defense of the right to show that kind of imagery.
All right, please state your name. Question for Scott.
Hello, Sheree.
All right, let's try that one more time. You can state your name and your question for Scott.
Hi, my name is Shay, and my question for Scott is, following your ideology, if we were to outlaw abortion, how would we prevent women from doing self-induced abortions? I've read quite a bit of guides since Mr. Trump has been elected, so.
Yeah, fair question, Shay. Is it Sheree or Shay?
Shay.
Shay. All deaths from illegal abortion are a tragedy. We agree on that. But notice the objection assumes the unborn aren't human, because otherwise what we're arguing is that because some people will die attempting to intentionally kill others, the state ought to make it safe and legal for them to do so. But beyond that, we should point out that this doesn't justify abortion. Marianne Warren, who supports abortion, philosophy professor, says murder is wrong regardless of the consequences of prohibiting it. In fact, Dr. Mary Calderon, the medical director of Planned Parenthood during the 1960s, wrote in this article here in the American Journal of Public Health, that the death rate from illegal abortion, including self-induced abortions, was so low it wasn't even worth remarking on. And then she explained why. With the advance of penicillin, post-operative infections plummeted. Women weren't dying from any surgical procedures the way they used to. In fact, the CDC says that 39 women died from illegal abortion in 1972, the year prior to Roe v. Wade, not 10,000 as Barbara Boxer would have us believe. In fact, Bernard Nathanson made the point in his book, Aborting America, Bernard Nathanson being the co-founder of NARAL, National Abortion Rights Action League, that the figure of 10,000 women a year dying from illegal abortion was made up out of thin air. There was no statistical evidence for it whatsoever. And to just give you a modern current example, when the Hyde Amendment was passed in '76 that cut off tax funding for abortion, we were told that women would die in the streets from dangerous illegal abortions. It didn't happen. The claim of 70,000 women a year dying in third world countries, first of all, let's compare like with like. Just because it happens there doesn't mean it would happen here. But beyond that, the claim is totally unsupported. The United Nations Population Division called the claim quite speculative, unquote, and hard data was missing. The World Health Organization, in the very article that cited it, said, we have little info that's available to support the claim. In other words, it's a guesstimate. People are making up these numbers, not you, but people who want to exploit this and claim that thousands of women were dying, when in fact, we don't even know what the populations are in these third world countries, let alone how many women are aborting there.
Nadine, any kind of
just
response?
that the Alan Guttmacher Institute, which is an expert on these issues, as well as the World Health Organization, have come out with those numbers. It's true, when abortion is illegal, it's no doubt underreported. But what I think is really powerful is to read the testimony of doctors who began their training before Roe versus Wade, when they saw with their own eyes women in this country, we're not talking about the developing world, in major cities, including Boston and New York, coming in and dying of botched abortions, either self-induced or through unethical, untrained providers. And it's just simply I was going to say inconceivable, but that sounds like a terrible pun. I cannot grasp how it could possibly be consistent with a reverence for life to remit women to what we know they are going to continue to do. The only question is, will it be legal and safe, or will it be illegal and dangerous?
Safe for whom?
Next question for Nadine. If you could please state
Nadine.
your name.
Hi, my name is Tina. Thanks for answering my question.
Thank you, Tina.
You mentioned that in Scott's opening statement, he had a crucial missing piece, which was the woman. I'm wondering, how do you justify the fact that a man has absolutely no rights when it comes to protecting his child, as long as his child is in the mother's womb?
I think that it would be absolutely desirable to have the father participate in any discussions, and certainly to share responsibility and planning. Scott probably has the numbers at his fingertips. He does this more often than I do, but I've read the numbers of women who have abortions are vastly disproportionately single, have no man in their life, or if they do, the man is somebody who is abusive, has subjected them to violence. So certainly that type of person should not be entitled to a say. And if there is a tragic situation where there are two fully committed partners in a stable relationship and there is a disagreement, it's clear that the tiebreaker has to go to the person in the pair who is going to bear the most direct, ongoing physical, psychological health consequences, and that would have to be the woman. So interestingly enough, in the Casey case, which in 1992, as both Scott and I have talked about, even though the Supreme Court vastly cut back on the scope of the abortion right and allowed the government to regulate it more intensively at an earlier stage in the pregnancy than in Roe versus Wade, there were 5 abortion regulations that it considered from the state of Pennsylvania, and it upheld all of them, even though all of them had been struck down under the Roe regime, with one exception. And the exception was a Pennsylvania requirement that the father had a veto over whether or not the woman could have an abortion. And the Supreme Court, to the best of my recollection, over one dissent, but with a very strong consensus, said no for the reasons that I gave, that this is something that is uniquely affecting the woman, and therefore the choice has to be with her.
Scott.
Well, if fathers get no say in the abortion decision, I wonder why we force them to pay child support if the mother chooses to give birth to the child. It seems a little unfair here. But gentlemen, do take note. You have no rights. You have 0. You get no say in protecting your own child. That is the current legal reality in America today. And it all comes back to this idea that women have a fundamental, absolute right to bodily autonomy. But here's the problem. Those who argue that the unborn have no say in this, that the mother has primary or absolute bodily autonomy, run into some difficult things to explain. What if, for example, a woman is sick during pregnancy and she wants to take thalidomide to reduce her morning sickness, but we know that thalidomide causes her to give birth to children with no arms and no legs. That's what happened in the 60s. Her doctor tells her don't take it, but she takes it anyway, and then gives birth to a child with no arms. Do we think she did anything wrong? You see, the idea that only the woman can decide this leads to horrendous ethical implications. Not only do dads get off the hook, I mean, I think most men are quite happy to leave it to the woman and avoid responsibility for sexual decisions. I think that just played right into the hands of men In fact, that's what Bernard Nathanson said. They got together with attorneys who were very, very male-oriented when they were pushing through the abortion laws in the 60s and 70s that liberalized the laws. And they got together with these guys and said, hey, let's make this easier on ourselves. And they were quite happy to work with feminists on this. I think that if the unborn are human beings, and I've argued tonight that they are, they deserve the same protections you and I do, and their dads deserve the right to defend their children just like they do other children.
Question for
All right,
Scott.
we'll stop it there. Thanks. All right. If you want to see the rest of that, you can find it on YouTube. I want to make a few announcements, see if there's some finishing questions. First of all, I have 1, 2, 3, 4. I have 7 of these. First come, first serve. This is a little documentary put out by Ray Comfort. He was the one who combined with Kirk Cameron to do Way of the Master. I don't know how familiar you are with that. It's called 180. Basically, he's interviewing Berkeley, college, university students, and others about abortion. In this movie, he makes some comparisons with the Holocaust. I find this gripping and moving. If you like it, it's free, but first come, first serve. The other thing I was going to encourage you to do is to write these down. These are 3 of my favorite podcasts about pro-life issues. So I'm going to give them to you in my top 3. So I'll start with number 1, my favorite 2 Canadians called Pro-Life Guys. Absolute favorite. I love the way they present their show. 2 believers working with pro-life conversations in Canada, but they often refer to the legal happenings and court decisions in the United States. So they stay current with what's going on in the United States, but you will really enjoy it. Pro-life guys. The other one that I want to recommend is with Scott Klusendorf, and it's called Pro-Life Thinking. It's a little more heady, a little less entertaining. Pro-life guys are both sound. They give great arguments, but they're entertaining. So I can actually listen to the pro-life guys when I'm running. I don't enjoy listening to pro-life thinking when I'm running. It's just too hard. So, but they're both great, solid, pro-life thinking. And the final one I wanted to give you is actually the ones who put this little booklet that I gave you together, and it's called Pro-Life America. Pro-Life America. These guys, when you listen to their show, you're going to think, wow, this is a completely different approach. Pro-Life America's approach is, we will win. We're in it to win it. Seriously. So they're all about taking away the supply of abortions. Now, generally speaking, what we've talked about in this class together is having arguments to help people understand the immorality of abortions, right? So we've talked about the people who are contemplating abortion or the people who will be apologists for abortion. This is a different approach. The approach that Pro-Life America is taking is, if we can cause abortions to be so scandalous, such a pariah of sorts, that there will be no abortionists that want to perform abortions. So they've gone about this by some really creative things. I think I told you once that they took cartoons that were about lawyers and used car salesmen. Not if you're a used car salesman or a lawyer, that's bad. But they took those jokes and they basically reworked them to go against abortionists, and they sent them to all the medical universities around so that they continued to make being an abortionist or providing abortion something that's looked at as horrendous. That's the kind of thing they've done. They've done things that are a little more academic. They've sent out surveys to abortion providers, and then they took those surveys. They sounded like they were people. So this is an ethical question. They posed as though they were pro-choice, and that they were doing this information gathering from abortion providers, and then they switched it on them, and they revealed who they really were. but they got all this info from people who were providing abortions, and they were sharing how it was a horrendous thing to be involved in. So they got all of these quotes, and then they unleashed it. I forget what the name of the project is, but it's on their website. And that leads me to this final thing. I sent you home with this booklet. I hope you'll all take one. I think there are like 114 different possible questions that are asked, and we've only dealt with a few. So this is kind of like a resource. If you're having a conversation with someone who's pro-choice, these are some of the popular kind of pushbacks or questions, and they give and provide some adequate answers. You're going to notice that this, again, is not going to come from supplying you with biblical answers. Now, are there biblical answers to be pro-life? I hope you know, absolutely, 100-fold. But that's not what this is preparing you for. This is preparing for you to speak to someone and not necessarily bringing up your faith or what the Bible teaches. Not that we're ashamed of it, but the conversations are focused on an apologetic for life. Questions, thoughts, are there any of you, maybe you've already looked through this, and I was going to point out a few of the questions that I thought were particularly helpful, or the answers rather. But maybe we could use these last 5 minutes to see if there's any concluding comments, questions, things you'd like to say before we wrap it up. Yes, Becca, I'm sorry. No, you can. Right. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Correct. Very good point. 2 years ago, we had our one of our first Sanctity of Human Life Sundays here. And after the Sunday service that week, I got quite a few emails, but I remember two that I saved. Well, I saved them all, I think, but two that I saved especially were from moms here in our church family who had been told by doctors that their children were going to have some debilitating diseases or that they probably should consider very strongly aborting the pregnancy, and they didn't. And in both those cases, this isn't always the case, but in both those cases, and it certainly doesn't justify it if it wasn't the case, but in both those cases, their children were all healthy. So to your point, those kinds of tactics, even if the doctor's sincere, should be weighed with an ethic of life, right? Yeah. Yep. Did? Right.
And they're not wrong. They're not wrong when they challenge us, especially as Christians, with a question like that. And, so this is a shameless plug for those of us who find ourselves staunchly pro-life, but yet we're not willing to be challenged to rise to the occasion and really put our money where our mouth is
Very good point by a family that has adopted and has fostered, even though you said you're ready to be done with the foster system. Yeah, I think it's a great point. I mean, we talked about in this class that sometimes that can be kind of the question that says, okay, are you really pro-life? And I know you're not suggesting that every family can adopt, but being an advocate for the life that we're advocating that is not going to be killed is certainly the other side of the pro-life position, isn't it? You know what, that is a great place for an end. It's 10:30, and that is a wonderful benediction to our class. Thank you, Ed, for giving us that. God bless you. Thanks for joining us. I hope you got a book. If you want it, we've got extras, so you can grab a couple. And next week, there'll be a combined Sunday class in here. It's actually going to be a church family meeting. And then on April 3rd, we start our new quarter of classes. And I would like to make a shameless plug for mine, Genesis 1 to 11, the beginning of the world. We're going to talk about those foundational chapters. God bless you. See you at 10:45 if you haven't already been to worship.